Sam, it's so wonderful to be able to connect with you and have you on the podcast. I mentioned before we jumped on this interview that I was looking at your work this morning with a colleague, and I'm really excited to learn more about you and your work. So thanks again for being on the podcast.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me.
Perfect. Great. So I know a little bit about your background and where you're coming from, but I would love for you to share with everybody listening a little bit about, where you're from and how you really started your creative practice and journey.
Okay. Um, so I live in Arkansas now. I teach at University of Arkansas, and I grew up in Arkansas. I grew up in a city called Fort Smith, and lived there from childhood through high school, and then went off to college at other places. And I grew up in a fairly creative family. So I have told people I'm a second generation black sheep. Um, and so my mom is an artist and my dad is a musician, and both my brothers play music. And so we just kind of it was kind of just the currency in the household to do stuff like that. And so in school as a kid, art was a thing that I wound up taking classes for. I didn't really pursue music in an academic way, but I did and do like play in bands and stuff like that. And then as I kind of made my way through college, I went to University of Tulsa for undergraduate, and and I initially kind of started that program as a graphic design major, but it wasn't a really big art program, and so I kept running into this thing where the next painting class I wanted to take would be at the same meeting time as the next graphic design class I needed to take. And so eventually I just had to choose, and I chose to stay with art, as a, like fine art. And I think part of the reason that I thought that I could do that was, my kind of mentor that I worked with the most there was Mark Lewis, who, you may know who he is. And he really great painter, still a great painter. And he kind of made it seem possible, like to be a painter, be a professor. He was so easy to work with and was constantly encouraging us to look at artists. And of course, this was before everybody relied so much on the internet. So his office was like this great like repository of all these catalogs and things he had scooped up from trips to New York. And so it really felt like being initiated into something kind of special, because you could go to the library and find the monographs, which I later found out Mark was also asking the library to buy. Um, but um, but but the catalog thing seemed more rare, or scarce. And so I found out about a lot of painters that I still think are, great artists. And that led me eventually to Indiana for grad school. And I was there when I was there. It was, the more senior faculty were Barry Gelt, Bonnie Sklarski, Bill Itter, and then the younger faculty were, Tim Kennedy, Eve Mansdorf, Martha MacLeish was there as well. She was my supervisor when I taught in foundations. And Caleb Weintraub was a VAP at that time, and Andrew Winship was there as well. So yeah, it was a good time to be there. It was a great cohort of people. Learned a lot, so yeah.
Yeah, that's an all-star cast right there at IU that you're able to study with.
Yeah, it was quite a time. I think that the senior faculty they had really settled to their kind of, both their philosophies and their kind of teaching styles, and were moved quite comfortably. And Tim and Eve, they certainly were fully formed by then as well. So uh, it's actually quite stable in hindsight. Like, having done like 20 years of academia myself at this point, it feels like another world, to think back on it.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about that too, in terms of something I've been thinking about this summer, because I'm currently at Chautauqua, is bringing in different voices and teachers.
Hmm.
And you can have great artists who may not be the best teacher, or you can have somebody in the flip. And so I'm
Mm,
just curious in terms of the stability that you can now look back on that the IU program has, and where you think that kind of comes from, you know?
yeah. Well, it was I mean, it was a place that at that time, and again, this is like 20 years ago. I was there from '03 to '05. Um, it was a place that was very self-conscious about having a point of view. And
Mhm.
and I think the attitude was like, we're not going to do everything. We're just going to do some things. And we're going to try to really do those well. And so, and there were kind of like traditions that had been in place for many years, like the way they did their critiques every semester, these kind of big critiques. And you know, points of point like I said, points of view that had been long forming, and maybe also just adjacency to some really known names, you know, that helped to define that program as a uh, you know, it's like kind of crazy how many IU grads teach across the Midwest, you know, like even at this just at this school at University of Arkansas, uh, there's quite a few IU either undergrads or grads that teach here or recently taught here.
Mhm, mhm.
So,
Well, IU is such a powerhouse of an MFA program. I remember I went to a graduate critique. I was an undergraduate in the Midwest, and
mm,
we traveled out. And I think it was 2000. It was definitely between 2003 and 2005. So
okay. Wow.
and my faculty member that I worked in undergrad, Glenn Sebulosh, had a show out there. So we all went out to see the show, and then we stuck around to be in the crits just to see what it was like, since
Yeah.
we were thinking about moving forward with our MFAs. But
Gotcha.
I meet so many incredible artists who had such a formative experience at IU. And
Hmm.
so you come out of this robust program. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like leaving a program like that and then going into your own work?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I kind of had to go through graduate school again. You know, I moved to Arkansas right after that and kind of picked up work in Fort Smith, at University of Arkansas Fort Smith, which used to be West Ark College. And my boss there was Don Lee, who is retired now, but had been the head of that program for many, many years. And for most of that time, it was just a community college program. They had a really tight, defined 2 year thing that they did. And so you might know the painter John Lee, who out on the East Coast. That's John is Don's son.
Oh,
So
no way.
yeah. And so anyway, I knew that I could get a little bit of work there, and that was reason enough for me to go back to Arkansas. But I decided to set up shop in Fayetteville instead of Fort Smith, just to do something different, and because more of my friends had moved to Fayetteville. And so gradually, I kind of worked my way in at UA. But when I say I had to kind of go through graduate school again, I was one of those that went straight from undergrad to grad school, which even at that time was something that a lot of people would tell you not to do. And I think part of the reason I did it was like my friend pool in college was not strictly other art people. It was, you know, I was in the honors program, and so I knew people that were like in geology and physics and theater. So everybody had kind of a different path unfolding, you know, after that time at TU. And uh, most of them were going to grad school. So I thought that was kind of the normal thing to do. And I'd probably also attribute it to like an excess of confidence. Um, and so I went into grad school really not being formed as a person, you know, which I think really you should be. I think that grad school is a place to come where, you know, you you know some things about yourself, about what you can do, what you can't do, what you care about, what you don't care about, and you just have a little bit more. Uh, it's not strictly a place for possibility, I guess would be the way to say it. It's a place where things get real, and so that's like the one kind of regret I have about that time is that I didn't know enough about myself to know what what truly mattered to me versus what's just like jumping through other people's hoops well.
Mhm.
And so when I got out of grad school and came to Arkansas, I landed in a program, as a teacher, that was more interdisciplinary in its intent. I think in a practical sense, it was still pretty media area centric, like that there are really defined media areas, but there was this kind of encouragement towards interdisciplinarity, especially at the graduate level. And it was a smaller cohort. So in order to really have the sense of a cohort, you have to kind of put everybody together, get people together in a larger group. And our critiques were, everybody was in back then. It was not just the studio people, it was the art history faculty, the art education faculty, the graphic designers. Like, so an MFA critique, you had kind of a broad set of voices. Um, and that's shifted a bit more recently because the School of Art's grown so much. And so the MFA experience is actually much more defined specifically by studio faculty now. Um, but anyway, at that time, I had been in this very defined conversation at IU and at TU that was just about painting. And then, I land in Arkansas. I teach a few semesters in Fort Smith. I teach some semesters up here. And I just realized that there was a lot of stuff that I had like effectively ignored that was like, in terms of academia, it was canon. And
Mhm.
so I had to almost immediately broaden my scope just to be able to do my diligence as a teacher of a class. And God, like I remember one of the first things I taught, I was like probably 23 years old. I had to teach a basic lecture class on the humanities. This isn't even an art course. This is like you're covering music and theater and I kind of wish I could go back and give everybody that took that class their money back. I cannot imagine that I did a good job, Like I tried.
Yeah.
I actually
Yeah.
figured out some stuff I still use, but it was just at this kind of rapid pace that you just never feel like you could cover enough, because I feel like those classes are better taught by people that have really seen and done more, but I just wanted a job, so I said yes. Um, and anyway, that's a long time ago. And so that first maybe 5, 6 years of living in Fayetteville, while I was doing all this stuff as an academic, I was also kind of interrogating, what painting is in this changed context for me. So, I made a different kind of painting for a few years, and that wave of work kind of exhausted itself. And then I started making work that wasn't quite painting. I did some stuff with like translucent vellum and ink and draw, like more drawing driven. Would do stuff kind of like tracing my own drawings and then kind of using that as a layering material. And then that led into making these kind of short animated videos that it was kind of like you were like documenting work in process, but the whole reason the work in process existed was for the purpose of documenting it to make these videos. Um, and then when I got enough of that and came back to painting, I had been distanced from it enough that I could say, well, what is it that I actually look at right now? And I realized that, I had been a pretty like representational painter for a lot of that time. I had experimented with abstraction a little bit in college, but, not more than like 5 or 6 paintings. And and then I realized that I was looking more at abstract painting. And so I decided to give it a shot. And that kind of held my interest in a different way. It presented a different kind of challenge. Um, it's harder to know if I did a good job with them. It's much harder to make people care about an abstract painting. And for some reason that challenge um, stayed with me, and so and the work has evolved in the time since then, which has been maybe about at this point 14, 15 years. Um, and it's kind of both uh, it's opened up, but it's also kind of sharpened in the sense that the work looks like the work. There's a kind of consistency. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how I arrive. Somehow I managed to keep being a painter after that kind of process of interrogation, but I definitely had to do a trip that was more opened up to possibility than what I did at IU. IU, it was like you would be in these crazy conversations with your peers about like whether to use, Demar varnish or Copal varnish. Like any of us could get a hold of Copal varnish easily. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like you'd call
Yes.
like call Robert Doak and he's like this stuff is just for furniture, and anyway, it got pretty specialized, I guess, like I definitely did like traditional rabbit skin, lead white canvas preparation a couple times which does ruin you.
Yeah.
Like it does. Like once you've done that, you're like, oh, this is legitimately better. And so anyway.
Oh, well, I love it. I love, when I showed up for that critique at IU, I remember somebody was getting hammered because they were not able to explain how you entered the painting, and then it really got into like the right bottom corner and like, and that was like their entire critique. And I now realize I'm always thinking about the right bottom corner of my painting, and I think it's because of the whiplash I had from the
That's so
eye.
funny. You know what that makes me think of?
Mhm.
Uh, oh, that's so funny. So there's a large Fairfield Porter painting at Crystal Bridges, which is like, a half an hour north of me. And it's got this like black chair wedged like into the bottom right corner. And when I've taken students up to the museum and we kind of look at that painting, um, we hang out with it for a while. And there's all these idiosyncrasies in the painting, like the floor, the shadows on the floor are all a different color. Like the more
Mhm.
you look at it, the more it kind of comes apart. And even though it's very cohesive at the first glance. And then after, a few minutes of that, I'm like, how about that chair? And they're all like, whoa, what? Like they had just been ignoring it the whole time, looking at everything else. And maybe it's the inverse of what you're talking about. It's like, or it's such an effective entry point that you didn't even know you walked through a door, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So
You're gonna have to send me that
I
painting. You'll have
will.
to send me
Yeah,
the info and everything about it because I want to see it.
I will.
Well, I think something else that I love that you're addressing in this conversation is when you come out of a very like powerful teachers or a program, and then you're left to your own devices. And I think there's so many young artists who have to go through this journey of discovery. It's wonderful to work with faculty who are just, they live painting, they love painting, they're doing it all, and they also have the personality to go with it. But
Hmm.
I also think leaving that type of space can be a moment of reckoning, if you will, And so I really enjoyed hearing about how you were able to go through that transition and find what really spoke to you in paintings or what was important to you in paintings, and then really just open up, sharpen it, be in it. So I'd love to talk to you about the work right now. You know,
Hmm.
a couple of the things that I was really responding to that I'd love to hear more about is thinking about like the space in your paintings and the color palette.
Hmm.
Um, those are two things that I go to. I mean, there's much more that I'd love to talk about, but I'd love to start there with your work.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Okay, space and color. Yeah. Well, those are two of the big, drivers for the paintings. And color color is kind of the way that they evolve. And that what that means in the practical sense is letting a color define or dominate a work um, to the point that I get sick of it or that I feel like it's not working. And and then making decisions about either just reducing the overall impact of it or changing it, painting something over it. Or if the painting itself has gotten too kind of clotted, um, maybe taking it off the stretchers and cutting it up and dispersing it across several other paintings, you know. So that there's color is a driver in that way. Like that's actually how I move through time with the paintings. And then space, you know, there's even though they're abstract paintings, they are about the conventions of seeing and illusion. So like I do think of them as having like they're accountable to gravity. I don't flip them over when I work on them. You know what I mean? So like they are spatial, both in the sense of like I'm interested in having a good uh just sort of 2D design impact, but also they they tend to have sort of windows into a deeper, you know, space. Like it seems like you're looking through, which I can't say I set out to do this, but one of the things I've heard about, you know, the higher end architecture of this region is that it in some ways it's a response to this being a very wooded area. And so if you're out in nature, you're always kind of like looking through something at something else. And and you see that in, you know, whatever, like Faye Jones, people that, you know, or Edward Durrell Stone, people that kind of followed in their footsteps. Um, and uh, and like I said, I didn't necessarily like set out to discover that. I think for me, it comes more from just, you know, like Hans Hofmann or something.
Mhm.
Um, but but it's a nice coincidence or alignment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things I really respond to when I'm looking at them is these I thought of them, I was thinking of them as like holes through or like space through. So you like
Hmm.
there's gridded structure and there's these different layers, and I'm able to kind of push through into space and break things apart and bring it back together, which is really exciting to me. And so you were also talking about as you were, you know, navigating work and moving forward, that you were doing these layered drawings, you know, with the vellum
Hmm.
and all of that. Do you feel like that process of going through it is still a bit in
Oh
your work,
yeah,
influenced it?
certainly. Yeah,
Mhm.
certainly. I think that there are two things there. Yeah, the layering and then the kind of compression of time that that process created. So like if I made 10 drawings and then did like these tracings of all of them and then took chunks of the tracings and then assembled them into, you know, into a single drawing, that's like a, you know, a big compression of time.
Mhm.
And the paintings are even more of that because they take longer to make, and then, you know, they sit here, some of them, and I'll get them out every now and then and kind of check in and say, hey, is this still doing it for me? And if it's not, then it kind of goes back into the you know, hopper. Like it's I'll take them apart and make something new out of them. And so, you know, I definitely was one of those that came up in a period when it was like you got to build your own stretchers, and that's one of the things that I've kind of abandoned because I take my paintings apart all the time. It actually works way better for me to buy prefab stretchers because then I can reuse them. I can build different dimensions of stretchers, and so I get a lot of usage out of them. And sometimes that's from, you know, taking them apart, putting them back together. So and then also like I use a little bit of everything. I use canvas, I use linen, I use pre-primed linen. Um, I have this like real wide weave burlappy kind of linen that I really buying it was a mistake, but I've figured out how to use it. Um, so they're all like I like to think that I have more than one negative space or more than one, you know, zero, like if we're thinking of ones and zeros. Like when I when something is unpainted, there are several different versions of what unpainted is in the paintings. Yeah.
Something else as I'm going through your work that I'm really interested in is like this idea of like mark and scale on the canvas.
Hmm.
You know, some of them, and I also know that you are a musician. And so like
Hmm.
as I'm looking at these ones where there is like these smaller forms or movements and they're all you know, like
Hmm.
jittered in there. Um,
Hmm.
I would love for you to talk a little bit about that when you're working in a painting.
Sure. I mean, part of I am interested in kind of materiality. And
Mhm.
part of, from in my experience, part of becoming more adept at an instrument is coming to grips with the materiality of that instrument. And in the present day, that could say with guitar, that could mean not only the instrument itself, but things that like pedals and stuff that you step on, which all have their own they have materiality as well. They have limitations. They have stuff that probably the manufacturer is like, well, we wish that it didn't do this, but this is as good as we could get it. And I think over time for me, I think this is something that I learned when I was making the kind of work in process videos. It's like I actually wanted to show people like what it's like to be in this, making this. So, I guess a real easy example of that in the paintings I make now is that if I cut a painting up, I use all of it. I'll use the part that had been wrapped around the side and the back of the stretcher. Like that's to me, that's almost negative space again. It's got some wrinkles and it's got some paint smudges and staple holes and stuff, but that kind of chatter, that noise is also it's the fingerprint of what a painting really is, right? Like that's the side effect, of making this stuff. And so I choose to put that kind of on the front of paintings that entail some level of collage, because for me that's like bringing people into more of what this thing really is, like what the real material conditions of a painting are. Um, and so that I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I love this idea of what you're talking about bringing like as you're kind of cutting it up and establishing using what's on the side and taking that back to zero. I find that really interesting
Hmm.
to think about because it's like deassembling and putting back together a painting in this new orientation and using all the bits, you know. Do you ever use
Yeah.
like the backside, like you paint on it and then you like flip it over and use the backside instead of the front?
No, I haven't done that. No, I don't think I have at least. And, no, I haven't. No, I definitely haven't done that. I've done some stuff like to try to get, um, like to intentionally create materials that I know will be used for collage. Most of it, most of it is sincerely gotten, where like I try sincerely to start a painting that doesn't need any collage, and every
Mhm.
now and then I get one. Um,
How
and
does
but
that feel? How does that feel when you get one? When you're
oh,
like, oh wow, I missed
it's
it.
very hard to trust it.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, because in school, everybody that was really in this that I knew we were all looking at stuff like British school painting, like, Arbach or Freud, these people that would just like toil for
Mhm.
months, years on the same painting. And so, or like Antonio Lopez Garcia. And I mean, obviously, in some cases, there's more of this kind of like precision thing, like where it's like you're after this kind of level of particularity that feels almost impossible. But in some cases, it's more dynamic or gestural, like Arbach. And in any case, like I believed that there was some kind of uh, truth in the or authenticity in the thing being very worked. And like I don't believe that anymore exactly. Like I don't think the work saves you. Like you could work forever on a crappy painting. But I do think that I still feel it. Like when I'm assessing my own work, if something shows up in a very breezy way, like a kind of afterthought, um, I really still have I have to like choose to trust it and say like this is also my work, or this is also the product of a rigorous, disposition in general.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I don't know, like how do I put this? Um, I do like it when that happens. It's just I know that for me, it's like a thing I have to kind of remind myself that this is also a really good result, to get something that feels kind of weightless.
Mhm.
So,
Um, I guess this brings us to the big question that we all have, right? Which is like, how do you know when a painting is done, quote unquote,
Oh yeah, I got an
And-
easy answer for that.
oh, good, good. Oh, I
Yeah,
love it.
I usually just tell people it's when I want to keep working on it, but there's nothing to do.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah. Like not every melody, not every good melody needs a harmony.
Mhm.
And yet you might be singing 100 of them in your head when you listen to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like that. I'm writing that down. When you want to work on it, but there's nothing to do, you're like, well, how this is working this way. I've got this movement happening here. What am I just going to blow it up just to blow it up? Like, why,
Hmm.
why would I do that? I was having this conversation, and I'd love to hear what you think about this. Um, I have this idea of a performative mark. Like when somebody is making a painting and then they decide just to kind of like add this like mark to kind of make it feel like it's a quote unquote painting, and it just feels really performative to me.
Hmm.
Not to say that that's bad. I guess I'm trying to figure out how I feel about it. But do you have any thoughts on that? Like in a painting where you see somebody working on it and you're like, why is this happening right here? And they're like, well, I felt, like
Yeah.
performative mark. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I think that I mean, I have to base my response on my own kind of experience or process at first, and that would be, if I try to do something like that, if I try to like protect what seems like a really awesome moment, then you end up kind of building a whole, armature around it that over time, I think it compromises the overall compositional impact of the painting. That's my instinctive answer. I think some people can probably pull it off. Um, but it reminds me, like, you ever watch like painters painting the old mostly black and white?
Mhm.
Frank Stella has like a very like just astute analysis of a lot of the stuff that was happening contemporaneous to him. And and he's like, yeah, people come in, they make this big heroic gesture, and then they kind of get in trouble in the corners. Like like he was explaining why he was making these shaped, canvases. It's like, well, I want the gesture and I don't want, weak corners, so I just take them off, you know? And it's very logical actually. Um, and I just remember thinking, so many of the artists in that documentary, like, bless them, they're so aloof,
Yeah.
it feels like the whole thing's a joke. And he just kind of came in and taught a class, it's pretty funny.
Mhm, mhm.
So
Hmm.
anyway,
I need to rewatch that. Maybe
yeah,
like find that. So now I'd love to hear. We've been talking about like the process of your paintings. Um, I would like to hear about like a day in the studio with you, like what
sure.
that looks like. Are you working on multiple paintings?
Yeah.
How do you set up your palette or work with that?
Yeah. I do keep multiple paintings going all the time. And that's just because the process there, some days something only needs 10 minutes of work or 30 minutes of work or an hour of work. And and so if you have a whole bunch of options, then you can still stretch it out over a long day. But the reality if we're talking about regular um, academic semester life, I'm not getting an 8-hour day. That's just a fact. I mean, I'm semi-administrative. I'm one of two associate directors for the school. So, that's an interesting thing about this work that has evolved over the last decade or so is that it has evolved to coexist with the realities of contemporary academia. And so, um, I certainly was brought up, like I said, in that kind of poetry of like I said, some British school painter just toiling for, 8 to 8, every day. That's the dream. That's what was supposed to be real painting. But my experience just has not been that. So I've had to come up with, I've had to, it's not like I did it very intentionally. It just sort of evolved out of necessity. But my paintings actually benefit from disruption, and which like disruption is a fact of life for me. Like it's just there's always stuff carving into my attention span. There's stuff, we can talk about broader cultural stuff like social media, but like I also mean my working life, email, this emergency, can you go meet this person from facilities management? This, that kind of stuff is present pretty much all the time. And so while I certainly love a long day with little disruption, I just don't get them very often. And this work, it it it's good that it gets unexpectedly stopped because that means that there's something happening I wouldn't have chosen. And then I get to decide whether to keep it or not. And it's good that I have to take a break because the kinds of contrasts and resolutions that become available are they're not merely the product of my desire, they're the product of my life.
I love work benefits from disruption. I think that's really powerful. And you're describing a world and a life that many of us have to exist in, right? Again,
Yeah.
the dream of the 8 to 8, the uninterrupted time by yourself, nothing coming in is really not a reality. And I think it can be disheartening as a young painter to see those ideals, that lofty space, and then be confronted with the reality of the day to day. And I think that's where a lot of sometimes it's hard for artists to shift when they're coming out of a program where they want to be able to do that. Um,
Yeah.
so I like that work of the benefits from disruption. I have a similar life, in terms
Yeah.
of trying to be
Oh,
able to
I'm
make
sure.
that
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
Um, so with this disruption that's happening, and you're going back and forth and working on the work, can you tell us a little bit about your color palette? Do you like pre-mix
Mhm.
colors and work, or have like an established palette that you want to be working from? Is it
Yeah.
always in response to the paintings that are up?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just say this. I have both like habits and initiatives.
Mhm.
So, my go-to core palette is, let me think through it. I tend to use a titanium zinc white, but I also have like a flake replacement around. Um, and I use a very like acidic yellow, a greenish kind of, it's
Mhm.
cadmium chartreuse is what I use. Um, and I use a cad red light. I use cobalt blue most often. I have like a pile of other paints that are options that I bring in, but I find myself kind of like my sort of calibrated starting point tends to be those colors functioning as sort of like the primaries. And then I have a couple of odd, earth tones I like to use. I like unbleached titanium. I like turkey umber. Um, I like these kind of like near black colors too. Uh, there was a while where I was kind of on the hunt for like transparent sepia was something I would use a lot. Um, and then, I've got like a pile of, greens, purples, or, oranges that I'll get into sometimes, uh, but yeah, so there are like colors that I really do use a lot. But then, oh, and sometimes quinacridone magenta, I use that too. Um, but it's like an unruly color. Almost every time I use it, it is it's it's doing like wet work. It changes the painting, but then it gets covered up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like I've got one right now that's almost completely covered with it, and I can't decide whether that's the best thing I ever did or whether that's going to be completely untraceable in a couple of weeks, you
I,
know.
I feel you on that color too. It's like you said, it's an unruly color. Like I'll put it in to make something work, and it changes everything. And then I'm like, oh God, I don't know if that's gonna be able to stay in there. So I like how you call it doing the wet work. And
Yeah.
you're like, this has actually got to go.
Yeah, I have a whole set of behaviors that will accompany using, magenta or magenta plus a little white. Like the next three colors I'll instinctively want to mix create the most like awful harmony. Like and I do it almost every time and I'm like, why do I keep doing I hate this. But it's like this whole routine, It's so funny. I've got old paintings that I that I guess I should say it's escaped out into the world. Like I've let this relationship of colors into the world a few times and it's always kind of like it just barely got out the door, because it took me right to my edge of like what do I like? But I think that the paintings kind of have to do stuff like that. I think that they need to be and I don't mean to sound kind of like too woo about it or whatever, but it's they kind of have to have their own autonomy. They have to have their own life. And I don't think of myself as uh like my job is just to try to create circumstances where something new happens, And I know it's all coming out of me. I know this is all me, but I don't like all of myself uniformly either. So I guess that's part of it. You know what I mean? And so
Love
like it's kind of like by opening up to what could happen, you end up with things that surprise you. And that's still something that I want in the work. I want each painting to kind of make its own case and not to be a repeat of something I already did, you
it.
know.
No, I know what you mean where it's not like this woo woo like my painting is like alive, but it is its own it captures time, it captures movements, it becomes its own thing, mostly if like you're more of a process oriented painter where you have to be responding to
Hmm.
what's happening there. And it's this culmination of different moods, thoughts, experiences. Maybe you just had a fire alarm going off that you're dealing with and you come in, you know what I mean? And you're like
Yeah,
capturing something from that. Um,
yeah. Something that comes to mind for me, you know, uh, when I was a landscape painter, that's what I was doing early on at IU. I was real into Raxar Downs, and he said, I think it's in his Art 21 episode, he said something like, as soon as you start to represent the physical world in two dimensions, you're entering the realm of metaphor, something like that. And even though I've become an abstract painter, I find that an incredibly relevant thought, um, you know, because what you're doing, making an abstract painting the way that I do, is like you're constantly assessing the value of things on a real essential level. Like, does this get to exist or not? And does things about space, compression, harmony, and I think all of these things have incredible metaphorical capacity. I think it's hard to pin them down convincingly with specificity. Like I can't point to some, triangle and say like this means this. And you're like, oh yeah, definitely. Like I can't do I don't think I can get away with that. But I think that what I get in trade for that lack of specificity is the possibility that the work can communicate something very essential to someone that is also very personal if they want it, you know. So I do think that there's incredible uh, metaphorical possibility even in an abstract painting, And for me, that's a lot bound up in the process, the materiality, and then also the composition. So um, yeah. And I guess the other thing that I jump to in this is that I know that the work is kind of like it's it owes a lot to modernism, and so there's a kind of constant anxiety of a timestamp, like is this really a now painting kind of thing? And I think that I felt emboldened to try by contemporary painters like say like Amy Silman or Kelty Ferris comes to mind as well. People that were able to kind of revive that um, some of the aesthetics of it and then use it in a way that feels like it belongs to today. Um, Amy Silman had that great article years ago called like Abex and Disco Balls, where she's saying it's like you should treat it like some high fashion that you found at the thrift store, you know, like
Mm,
it's very valuable, but you get to have it for $5. And so if you want to cut it up, it's your business.
mhm,
So
mhm.
that I took to heart for sure, and I give that reading a lot. Yeah.
Love that. So I would like to come to this point where, you know, you've had such a like this growth in your work and understanding, or at least a conversation that you stay in with
Mhm.
it. Along the way, I'm sure you've picked up a lot of advice or thoughts from other artists that have meant a lot, like the Amy Silman
Mhm.
essay. And I was hoping that you could share something with
Mm.
artists who are listening that has been really valuable for you or helped you in your life as a painter.
Sure. If we're going back in time a little, I gravitate to the 60s a lot. I think that that was a moment of incredible possibility. And I think that's in many ways the years that followed it were kind of reactionary, kind of closing the door back a little bit. So people like, Susan Sontag come to mind. Um, uh, and also, this came up in a conversation with somebody the other day. Do you know who Manny Farber is, the critic and painter?
I know the name, but not really
Okay.
well, to be
He
honest.
was a film critic, but he was also an artist. And he wrote this essay called White Elephant Art versus Termite Art
Huh.
that I love. It's really an essay about B movies. Like basically, he's saying that stuff like Citizen Kane is stupid, and stuff like, like literally like some cowboy movie with John Wayne is better. And it's a funny stance, but it's the reason I would tell somebody to read it as an artist is that he reaches for examples in contemporary and historical art to make his point in the beginning. Specifically, Cezanne actually talks about how he likes Cezanne's watercolors better because they seem more like a true record of his interests and not this compulsion to finish a painting.
Mm,
Um, and but the real reason I would give it to somebody is I found it to be a cure for masterpiece syndrome. Like
mm,
you have to make this painting that's so full of meaning and so full of like that has this big symbolic or metaphorical impact. And he kind of reduces it to like what action matters to you, like what individual momentary action matters to you. So it's a cool essay. um and it's written very passionately, which makes it fun to read.
mm,
um and then contemporary, I like Maggie Nelson. Read a lot of her stuff. I think that there's a lot of stuff in her writing that is useful for artists. Again, kind of thinking about what's possible and what limitations we impose upon ourselves, either as people or in the studio or both. Um, and Rebecca Solnit. So gosh, but if you're wanting like good one-liners, I'm not sure if they're. I'll probably think of some right after we get off the call. I liked specific if we oh and Boris Groys, he wrote this thing that said that art in the particularly 20th century was defined by this kind of need to be avant-garde, to be predicting, to be a sort of vector of change. But in his opinion, change is the only constant. He said, we are living in the prison of permanent change.
Mm.
And I thought, I mean, that's a sharp way to put it, but it was memorable, you know. And I think I've thought about that line a lot with the kind of work that I make, that it kind of doesn't, my work kind of isn't anything until it used to be something else,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, these are all such great recommendations. I'm excited to read the white elephant art versus termite art. Is that what you
yeah.
said it was?
Yeah.
Looking
And
forward to
there's a collection of his writings called Negative Space that essay's in it, but it's also just free on the internet.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Wonderful. Well, Sam, this has been so wonderful to chat with you and learn more about your work, your life, what you're reading. Uh, can you share with everybody listening where they can find you online with your website
sure.
and Instagram?
Yeah. Yeah, so my website is sam-king.com, and my Instagram page it's the name Sam K, but there's two underscores in front of every letter. I was trying to get away with not having a number in it, so it's underscore underscore S and so forth. Um, and what else? I think those are the two main ways to see the paintings online.
Great. Well, we'll definitely be sharing those over on the website and over on Instagram, and of course, sharing your work, Sam.
Mhm.
So again, just thank you for taking the time out of your day to chat with me about.
Oh yeah.
Great,
Yeah, I'm honored to be invited. Thank you for having me. And
great,
yeah, thanks very much.
great. Thank you. All right. Have
All
a
right.
good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.